Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Mathis with the Mathis Group. We're a premier ATP with the Project Management Institute. Welcome to 7 Minutes to PMP Mastery. On today's video for your PMP exam, we're going to be talking about mastering stakeholder engagement. So let's begin with the definition of stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement is the process of identifying people, groups, or organizations that can affect or be affected by the project, understanding their expectations and influence, and intentionally engaging them to support project success. We want to focus on stakeholder engagement and look at it through the eyes of the PMP exam. So stakeholder management is not just about creating a stakeholder register. PMI tests whether the project manager knows how to build that alignment with the stakeholders and manage expectations, reduce resistance, and keep stakeholders engaged throughout the project lifecycle. Obviously, and we'll show you in a moment, there's a little difference between engaging the stakeholders over on the traditional side with predictive projects compared to agile. Stakeholder engagement in the people domain. The people domain includes collaboration with stakeholders, building trust, aligning stakeholder needs with project objectives, building shared understanding, and adjusting the stakeholder emotional needs. PMI expects the project manager to collaborate with the stakeholders, build trust, influence stakeholders, build shared understanding, mentor relevant stakeholders, and adjust communication or leadership approaches based on stakeholder needs. Stakeholder engagement in the process domain. The process domain includes analyzing, categorizing, engaging stakeholders, developing, executing, and validating a stakeholder engagement strategy. PMI also notes that the PMP exam reflects predictive, agile, and hybrid approaches across the exam rather than isolating them into separate sections. And so it intertwines them. PMI expects the project manager to analyze stakeholders, categorize them, engage them by category, and develop, execute, and validate a stakeholder engagement strategy. Stakeholder engagement in the business environment domain. Stakeholders are also connected to value delivery, benefits realization, compliance, organizational change, and external business environment changes. PMI includes tasks related to delivering value, appraising stakeholders of value progress, and supporting organizational change. The key PMP idea about stakeholder engagement is that stakeholders are not managed through control, they are engaged through communication, trust, influence, collaboration, and alignment. And so many times we think this is something that's relatively easy, but it has to be something very specific on the traditional side because some of our projects are so long, some of the stakeholders we need to engage are not being engaged until later on in that project. Stakeholder identification is continuous. This is a little different than what we might think. If we're doing a predictive project, we think we're identifying everyone up front as we write the stakeholder management plan. However, we are constantly identifying stakeholders, and stakeholders are constantly changing. So do not assume stakeholders are identified only at project initiation. On the PMP exam, new stakeholders can emerge when scope changes, risk occurs, business conditions shift, teams reorganize, vendors join, or users begin testing the product. The exam rule to keep in mind is when a new stakeholder appears, first assess the stakeholder's interest, influence, expectations, and impact before taking any action. So one of the challenges people have so many times, a new stakeholder shows up and we start trying to escalate or we start trying to engage them in so many other ways, and we haven't even done the first thing, which is assessing that stakeholder up front. Stakeholder analysis comes before engagement. So a PMI often tests whether the candidate knows the proper order. So here's what we're talking about. A strong PMP sequence is to identify the stakeholder, analyze power, interest, influence, impact, needs, and expectations, determine the current desired engagement level, update the stakeholder register and stakeholder engagement plan, communicate or engage according to that plan, monitor and adapt the strategy, and do not jump straight to escalation or change requirements or broad communication before understanding the stakeholder's position. Then you're going to match that strategy with what their position is. Stakeholder register versus stakeholder engagement plan. The stakeholder register identifies stakeholders and captures information such as role, interest, influence, expectations, classification, and communication needs. The stakeholder engagement plan describes how the project will engage stakeholders to move them from the current engagement level to the desired engagement level. The exam trap that you want to watch out for, if the question asks who are they, what do they care about, and how influential are they, think stakeholder register or stakeholder analysis. If the question says how should we engage them, think stakeholder engagement plan. Engagement levels in the PMP exam. So common stakeholder engagement levels will include these 5 different levels. Unaware, does not know anything about the project or its impact. The resistant stakeholder that knows about the project but does not support it. The neutral stakeholder, which is aware but neither supportive nor resistant. The supportive stakeholder, which is aware and supports the project, and then leading, which is actively champions the project. Now, the exam rule to keep in mind is that the project manager should not try to make every stakeholder leading. The goal is the appropriate level of engagement needed for the stakeholder's role and influence, not so that everybody is actively championing your project. So as you look at this graphic, this is a great graphic for a predictive environment. You have your project manager creates or updates various things. So you've got your stakeholder register, your stakeholder engagement plan, your communication management plan, and of course it's going to feed into your change management process. So I wanted you to be able to see this visually. I thought this would help you a little bit for your test to be able to see the sequencing of this. So you've got your register, and then you've got your engagement plan, which will feed into the type of communications that you're going to send that particular group. Also, in an agile environment, you'll notice that you've got your agile engagement. So you've got key characteristics of frequent, collaborative, feedback-driven, typical things that are going to happen. And then you also have stakeholders that may participate in backlog refinement, sprint reviews, product demonstrations, release planning. The exam trap that you see in this a lot of times in agile is that the project manager or servant leader does not bypass the product owner and directly reprioritize the backlog. The product owner remains responsible for product backlog regardless of what your question is if you have an agile test question. And so the best PMI response for this is listen, clarify, work with the product owner, refine, reprioritize the backlog with them, help the team adapt for future work, but don't cut that product owner out. You'll have some questions that will do that. The other thing would be the hybrid type question. And so you have several things with this. Formal governance might be very much traditional. Adaptive delivery might be very much agile. Some of the best things to keep in mind as you look at this, though, is that you facilitate alignment with the sponsor, the product owner, the team. You clarify priorities. You manage expectations. You communicate the trade-offs. And then you ensure governance and backlog practices are all working together. And so that will help you a little bit on the hybrid side. And then stakeholder PMP exam style questions. So this would be a question that you might get, something like this. A project is using a hybrid approach. The overall budget, major milestones, and vendor contracts are managed predictively while software development is delivered in agile iterations. During a sprint review, several end users expressed frustration that the latest increment does not support a workflow that they considered essential. The product owner explains that the feature is in the backlog but is currently ranked lower because the sponsor prioritized regulatory reporting features for the next release. The users then contact a senior executive directly and claim that the project team is ignoring operational needs. What should the project manager do first? A, ask the sponsor to direct the users to follow the approved communication plan and stop bypassing the product owner. B, meet with the user's product owner and sponsor to clarify the concern, review priorities, and facilitate alignment on value and release trade-offs. And then C, instruct the Agile team to add the workflow feature to the current sprint because end user satisfaction is critical to project success. And D, submit a formal change request to add the workflow feature to the project scope and revise the schedule baseline. So you have a lot of different pieces here to be able to consider for this. Now let's see what your answer is. So your best answer for this is B, meet with the users, product owner, and sponsor to clarify the concern, review priorities, and facilitate alignment on value and release trade-offs. This is a stakeholder engagement issue in a hybrid environment. The users are frustrated, the product owner has a backlog rationale, the sponsor has prioritized regulatory value, and the senior executive has now been pulled into the issue. The project manager should first facilitate understanding and alignment among relevant stakeholders. So what is wrong with the other answers? Let's break them apart and do a deep dive here. So A, ask the sponsor to direct the users to follow the approved communication plan and stop bypassing the product owner. So this is too authoritarian and it escalates the relationship problem. The users may have a valid operational concern. PMI would expect the project manager to understand the issue, engage the stakeholder, and build alignment. Communication plans matter, but using the sponsor to shut down stakeholder feedback would likely damage trust. So that's why you would rule that one out. C, instruct the Agile team to add the workflow feature to the current sprint because end user satisfaction is critical to project success. This bypasses the Agile roles and may disrupt the sprint commitments. The product owner manages the backlog priority, and the team should not be directed to add work mid-sprint without proper consideration. End user satisfaction matters, but it must be balanced against the regulatory priorities, sprint goals, capacity, and value. So that's why you wouldn't choose that one. On D, submit a formal change request to add the workflow feature to the project scope and revise the schedule baseline. This may eventually be needed if the feature changes scope, contractual commitments, schedule, or baselines. However, it is premature. The feature is already in the backlog, so the issue may be prioritization rather than scope. First, the project manager should clarify the concern and then facilitate the alignment. So I hope that gives you a little bit of input there on what to do with your test questions and why you'll rule some things out and rule some things in. As we bring this to a close, I hope it's been beneficial to you. We do PMP exam prep boot camps every other month. I'd love to be able to have you in one of our boot camps. Just jump on our website and you'll see our boot camps throughout the entire year. And so I hope this has been beneficial, and so I'll see you in another video. Bye now.